we'll call
had some physical illnesses this morning. He's out, and turn it over to Mr. Higgins.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and board. We'll start off, as he said, with the Claims Committee, which I believe there's some information behind tab I in your notebook. And just for information, as you heard the beat, we should have a few joining us this morning by phone. We should have our attorneys from Ice Miller and also perhaps Shannon Dice from Empower Retirement. And if there are any others, we'll just ask that they identify themselves. With that said, as far as the Claims Committee, we have a delinquent contributions update. You may remember from last time, I think there was one from the town of Goodman, right? Town of Goodman. We've had some progress there. Still a little bit pending there, but we didn't think it was necessary to bring that to the board again. With the town before you of Chula, there's been some progress there as well, but there still remains some delinquencies, which at this point are just employer contributions. So unless there are any questions, we would ask for your certification for the delinquent contributions of $11,118.19.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. That's all we have for the Claims Committee.
Claims Committee will stand adjourned.
All right, thank you, sir. We'll call the Administrative Committee to order. Mr. Higgins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item is the State Representative Board election, and you'll find this information behind tab D. There you'll see the ballot for your review and approval. They've been submitted and reviewed and verified internally in the historical fashion, and you can see the 4 names there on the ballot as provided prior to the meeting, and we'd be happy to talk through that or answer any questions, but if there are none, we would ask for the board or the committee's approval of the ballot of the state employee representative for the term that will start this coming July.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the ballot?
I'll make the motion.
Second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 2.
The next one, which is behind the next tab, tab E, I believe, is for the annual crediting of the interest rate for member accounts. And you can see the information there, and in accordance with previously adopted board regulations, there's a floor of 1% and a maximum of 5%, and it's based on the money market rate as published on December 31st of the year before. You can see that information in your notebook as well. And based on that, it was published at 0.41%. So with that in mind and in accordance with the reg, we would ask for your approval of setting and maintaining the rate at 1% effective this coming July.
Board members have any questions?
So moved.
Second? Second. Any further discussion? Motion, I guess I need to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Next was Regulation 59 behind the following tab F. And this has to do with updating this regulation that contains many actuarial assumptions. I'll give you a moment to flip through. It's 2 or 3 pages long. All the changes are in red. We'd be happy to go through these if you like. And of course, we have Mr. Ed Cobell with CAVMAC here with us. These changes simply update the reg for the assumptions, largely demographic assumptions, factors, rates, and so forth, based on the last actuarial experience study that the board has already adopted. And this is something that we commonly do every 2 years. So the changes here are just to reflect those changes in assumptions and factors per the board's approval of the last experience study. And this was put together primarily by Ms. Lee, but also with input from the actuaries who have reviewed it as well. So unless there are questions, we'd ask for your approval of initial adoption for this regulation.
Board members, you have any questions? And this is for initial adoption.
Yes, sir.
Shall I get a motion for initial adoption of Regulation 59, plan assumptions?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Thank you. And this is Regulation 60 behind the next tab. This too would be submitted for initial approval. And there are just a few changes, and similar to what we talked about yesterday in the ORP plan document, these changes just update this regulation about contribution rates to be compliant with the upcoming increases as outlined in state law. And unless there are questions, we'd ask for the committee's initial approval of this regulation change.
We're going to 19.4 on the percent. Is that where eventually we'll settle?
Let's see, 19.9 eventually.
19.9?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
that's the top, yep.
And how many years?
I think about 3 more. This goes to 18.9, right, yeah. So it's 0.5% a year until it gets to 19.9.
Okay. All right.
Any further questions? Can I get a motion to approve Regulation 60, contribution rates for initial approval?
So move.
Second, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Higgins, any other business?
No, sir.
All right, we stand adjourned, Administrative Committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think next up is the Legislative Committee, and I'll refer to Commissioner Dale if he wants to say a few words or two.
Main issue, of course, dealing with the, money, usually that's the issue. And it's kind of a bouncing ball between the Senate and the House. The Senate pretty well has proposed a $500 million one-time infusion with a $50 million stream per year for some length of time. Basically, the House is trying to use that as a crutch to pass online gambling and use that as a stream for our system. But all of that's pretty well up in the air, and there's, as usual the case, as the session goes along, there becomes somewhat a little friction between the House and the Senate over certain issues, and this year the issue probably has to do with school choice. And so now what will come out of each House is still unknown at this time. So really, there's really not anything to report other than I think something is going to happen, but I'm not really, my sources don't really know what that something is going to be. Now, Ray, you and the debaters been over there more than I have, but that's the report I got from leadership.
Well, certainly appreciate that, and I think that's consistent with some of the things I would share, and if agreeable, you know, well, I'll go through and provide an update and talk through. First, I would say this is one of those unique situations as far as the time frame, because you never know, or it's hard to tell ahead of time as far as planning the agendas and timing on how much we'll need to discuss or what we'll need to do. So this is one of those where, depending upon the questions and the subject, we may have a lot of extra time between now and lunch, but at the same time, we may talk and discuss various matters up to that time, and we certainly have that time allotted. As I mentioned earlier, and as you can see, Ed with CAVMAC is here, and we should have our attorneys from Ice Miller that are on the line. Behind tab H, you'll see a list of House bills and Senate bills that we think are of interest and are still alive. We would be happy to talk to those in more detail or answer any questions, but I thought what I would do is spend about 10 minutes or so just providing a little bit of an update, not necessarily going through each one of them individually or in detail, but talking about themes and key points. And part of that's because even if they're on the list or not, some could be dead, or depending upon which report or information that you hear, some possibly could technically die after key deadlines next week. But regardless of that, though, I think that the points or the themes or the key aspects behind them could remain or could resurface or live on, so to speak, in other bills or in other things. So I'm just going to talk through that, maybe about 10 minutes or so to just kick us off, I think, to set it up. I know there'll be a lot of questions and discussion. I know they're not here right now, but I certainly would like to thank Senator Sparks and Senator Blunt for authoring and signing on to our PERS requested bills, referring to adding the Roth or after-tax component to MDC and then also the payoff of the net pension liability bill should an entity leave PERS. So appreciate that. Those two are still alive. And you could say that, I think fairly, that if you took those two and you could add 4 more and say that those are, PERS are member-friendly bills. And of course, there's R2, but then there's also the funding bill that I know we'll talk about more. There's a Tier 5 COLA funding bill, a return to work bill, moving Tier 5 to 30 years type bill. And those are authored by Senator Sparks as well and others in some cases. And of course, one of the most important ones there is the funding bill. And just to remind you, Commissioner Dale highlighted some of this. It was really good to see, basically, Senator Sparks' bill on the first day of session for $1 billion and passed the Senate in the first week of session. So it's really good to see a serious effort to begin to help reduce the unfunded liability. At the same time, the House, as he mentioned, has a funding bill at this point too. And they've been very vocal for at least the last year about the need for funding for PERS. So certainly very hopeful, and I think there's reason to be optimistic that there'll be some additional funding coming to PERS. That is the most important, of course. It's very important that PERS receive some significant additional recurring funding more in line with the board and actuarial recommendations, and hopefully that'll be the case. I'll use that to be a transition to some of the main message, or one of the main points that we've tried to relay when talking to committees or talking to individual legislators, and in the context of legislation are these bills. And that is to just be mindful of the bills, the legislation, the various policy aspects, whatever it may be. Just be mindful of the potential cost or probable cost or impact on PERS, and be mindful of the funding need, and then of course somebody provide funding for it, and just be mindful of the potential cost impact on a system that's already underfunded. So we've tried to relay that. That would apply to anything, and we could talk about several, but I just want to talk about 3 areas, which are Tier 5, first responders, and then return to work. The Tier, and I'm going to save the return to work for maybe toward the end. That's probably the most complex one. As far as Tier 5, just briefly on that, the point being that now, unlike maybe in years past, but since Tier 5 is now in the law and in process of being implemented, any changes to that could have a detrimental impact on PERS from a funding standpoint or from a funding projection standpoint. So it just depends what that potential change could be on how significant or the materiality of that. But nonetheless, since it is the law and in the process, any changes to that could have a cost impact. So be mindful of that. The other one, of course, is first responders and return to work, which we mentioned in the fall. From the standpoint of first responders, like I've mentioned before, and I think it seems to be a generally speaking, a consensus of the board or committee, is if there's going to be anything done with first responders, the best way to do that for a system like PERS and in Mississippi is to leave them in PERS, identify the individuals, determine what the different benefit parameter may be, for example, 30 years instead of 35, and then someone pay for it. And at this point, even though I would definitely not try to predict a legislative outcome, as I'm sure you would probably agree, and nothing surprises me. But with that said, if I had to make an estimate today just for discussion purposes on what may be more likely than others, it might be that the years of service requirement is changed from 35 down to 30. And I say that for a couple different reasons. The first part being both chambers have passed some version of that. That's one part. The other thing is it's pretty easy to understand. It's clear, cut, and dried. It would be easier to implement. Obviously, we need a little time for that. Excuse me. But no one should be retiring anytime soon. So that's pretty clear. And it would have a cost, but probably in the grand scheme of things, I could see how some of those across the street would see is that it's affordable. It also, in my opinion, takes a step toward addressing one of the main things that you've heard from the first responder community about that length of time. And I know they are and have been for a 25-year retirement, but 30 years is still reducing it down from 35. And of course, that matches up with Tier 4, which has been that way approximately 15 years. So So I could see that's the case. On that note, a couple of slight administrative notes. If you'll see on the handout, there's a bill there, I believe it's 1126, that has a note in there that just mentions to be discussed briefly in the legislative committee. And the reason for that is, from what we understand, what was, as that bill, which was a teacher pay raise bill originally, was amended for some PERS provisions, our assessment right now is what was said about the bill and what we understand some of the intentions behind the bill don't necessarily match up with the actual wording of the bill. So that's why that's a little different there. But it covers the same topics I'm talking about as far as first responders and return to work. I'm not sure how the first responder community feels right now on the 30-year versus 25. I could see how they could begin to support the 30-year, but I don't know necessarily if that's the case.
What is the number of the first responders bill?
Well, there's several of them. Chris, you may have to help me on that. Let's see. I don't know. It's 1126 is what's left right now. There were many originally, but
Is that House Bill 1126?
yeah, that's the one just now talking about.
When you say first responders, does that include firemen?
That's right. It depends on how they define it, and I think 1126 defined it pretty extensively, which I believe, and Chris and Artavetta can help me, but it was law enforcement officers, firefighters, and I believe paramedics.
And 2909 does it for everybody.
Yeah, it just depends on which one.
Is that the group that has contacted the Stennis Institute about exploring the possibility of having a separate retirement system?
Yes, all of that is related to the same group and the same stakeholders and activity. Now, I will say, it does seem at this point, the idea of a separate retirement system or a separate plan does not seem to be what they're pursuing. So that seems.
Just a comment, if that should happen, and I respect the first responders and what they do, as we all do, because they play an important part. If that should happen to be successful, the teachers are right behind them, and then we won't have a retirement system.
Good point, good feedback. That's also kind of why I think that I could see, again, not making a prediction and nothing would surprise me, but I could see how the 30-year for everybody could be the way, the end result over there, because it would be for everybody, and it would address what I perceive as one of the loudest concerns from first responders, but then it would also be for teachers for the next time around.
We have separate bills that address Tier 5 and the 35 years in the House and the Senate, correct?
We certainly did. I'd have to check the list to see which is still alive, but
Senate Bill 2909 affects everyone.
2909 is for everybody.
yeah.
2909 out of the Senate lowers to 30 for everybody.
Everybody.
And
And
it's
then
still alive.
House Bill, let's see, House Bill 2 also says allow new tier members with at least 30 years, is what it says on the
But
synopsis here.
but 2 is dead.
Do what?
2 is dead.
Is 2 dead now?
2 is dead.
Okay.
In green.
Except, interestingly, at the time of publicizing this, it did not say that on the legislative website. And of course, I totally understand and agree, and
It's
Chairman,
not, nothing's dead.
That's
yet.
right.
It's the first dead.
that's right. Chairman Benson is exactly correct, but he just said what I was going to.
You're more involved in it than I am, but my sources tell me there's 2 items that's the most likely to get some positive reaction to. Is one is, of course, reducing the years, and the second is that return to work part of it. Those 2 issues probably are the most likely to move forward, according to my sources.
Absolutely, and definitely want to move into return to work. Let me say just a little bit more about the first responder part before we shift to that, and if it's okay with the committee. And that is, and I don't want to speak for the House, of course, but as of preparing for the meeting and stuff, unless and until we see or hear otherwise, it could be that the House's position is 25 years on the first responders. Now, that may change, it may have changed, but that based on some of the bills and conversations. And I was just going to say that to say this. In this context, that would include moving Tier 4 members back to 25 years. And so if that happens, certainly that's gonna have an impact in cost because they've been under a 30-year retirement for 15 years or so. And so that's gonna have a noticeable cost. Also, that may be something that's gonna have some implementation challenges. Obviously, if a law gets passed, we'll be able to do that. But that may take a little bit more time from an administrative and identification standpoint because the way that they've been reported currently and historically is not necessarily based on what type of position, but just more about the PERS coverage and eligibility and how long you work and things like that. So that one could perhaps be something better for another year. So I just want to mention that's out there, and if that happens, there'll be a cost in that. There might be more administrative challenges as we implement that, as opposed to just changing future employees with Tier 5. And unless you have any questions on that, now I'll go with
With those two issues, would it be a real negative impact on our system financially?
It definitely would have an impact. I think, and Ed could speak to this more. We're still waiting to get this refined. But I want to say from memory, in his earlier draft, if we move the first responders, which I think was calculated around 10,000 members or so, or 7% of the membership, which could be low, it was going to have around $100 million impact to the liability, I believe. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so just to explain why, so we've been funding Tier 4 first responders with a 30-year retirement eligibility. And they've had 15 years of accruals. You go and change that now all of a sudden to 25 years. That adds liability, that adds accrued liability, and adds a piece of the unfunded to it. So depending on how the bill is written, what eligibility they get and what other things they get that Tier 3 has that Tier 4 hasn't, yeah, we've seen an increase in liability from anywhere from 50 to $100 million.
Is that change of years just for Tier 5, or is it for the one we have now?
Well, there's one.
Well, he's talking about Tier 4, but this definitely being discussed and probably maybe even likely to go to at least 30 for Tier 5. But he's talking about Tier 4, but in the context of the bills, we understand the intent would be to move Tier 5 to 25 and the Tier 4 individuals to 25, which essentially makes them Tier 3. Now, that may not pass all the way.
That's the House bill
That's
position.
the House
That's
bill.
the House bill position. The Senate bill position just moved everybody, took everybody and moved them to 30, everybody in Tier 5 and dropped it to 30.
That's right. And that's 2909, right? Senator Sparks, I think.
Just for Tier 5?
Just Tier 5 to 30. Well, everybody else was already at 30 or lower.
And
So
that,
it goes
and that
just to Tier
doesn't
5.
increase liabilities because they're not here yet. Well, they'll be here in about 3 days, but they're not here yet. But it increases the normal cost, our projected normal cost of that group. So that increases the normal cost, so you get less of the statutory contribution going to pay down the unfunded. So that's what we've been kind of analyzing
So
the last couple months.
what I hear you telling us is if the legislature moves it from 30 years and the first responders get 25 years and they make it retroactive, they are doing exactly what they did in 1999 when they made the benefits retroactive without paying. Am I kind of saying that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Unless they fund it, of course.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. If they fund it, I mean, we haven't gotten current stuff funded.
I understand.
So
I agree, yeah.
I'm just wanting to make that analogy that what their legislature is criticizing what happened in 1999, they're about to do again if they do this and don't fund it.
Sure.
It'll be just like that, so increasing
But
liability.
without compounded interest this time.
Sir?
But without compounded interest this time, the 3%. So,
that's
same
right.
thing, but not.
But it will,
Yeah.
because
Not quite
the
as
service
Not
credit.
quite as much.
Service credit is based on, the COLA is based on the service credit.
That's correct.
And the payment. So it is magnified by that.
Yep.
Because they're still guaranteed COLA, so to speak, in that Tier 2. Now, this would be without that?
Well, there's the way it's written now, is there's confusion about whether Tier 4 first responders just get the 25-year retirement, but keep all other tier 4 provisions, like when the COLA starts and when the PLSO is eligible. So and the formula is different as well. There's the 30-year kind of tier for tier 4. So there's confusion on the bill. That's what Mr. Higgins said, is we're not sure exactly what they're getting after in, 1126 yet. So that's where the confusion.
And I would say that even perhaps at the time of that bill, which was amended, I guess, late on a deadline day, the position then may be different than the position now, so we'll just have to wait and see. But making the changes for tier 5 for everyone is certainly clearer. And it's just when you get into the tier 4, there's more complexity there, as been mentioned. If okay, and unless there are other questions on that, I'll move to the return to work. As Commissioner Dale said earlier, he's exactly right. The return to work / in-service distribution, that seems to be the topic. It has a lot of momentum. There have been bills, different ones from both chambers in different ways. So that has some momentum. I could see some version of that passing. And that's also the one that is the most complex. To me, it has the most moving parts. And I hope that they'll be cautious. Now, real quick, just to remind you on return to work, there's 4 main areas I think that you have to consider. That one is the policy implications. Of course, they're the policy makers. You have to change the law, and they're doing that, and they're the lawmakers. Then you get to the IRS compliance, and you get to the funding. As far as the IRS compliance, they seem to be, and the bills seem to be addressing that. There could be the need for some minor wording suggestions or something, but generally speaking, they seem to be covering that part. So I'll skip to the funding part, and that's the most complex part. And even though there are different bills, some of them, it just depends on which one, but there are some that are just for teachers. There are some that are for everybody. Some of them leave the break in service at 90 days. Some of them change it to 45 days. Some of them change it to 30 days. I would hope and recommend that whatever happens, I just hope that we and they are cautious, because none of us really know exactly what the future holds, of course, but cautious. Of course, be mindful of any potential cost or impact or adding additional liabilities to the system. Like I said and alluded to earlier, it'd probably be good to have what I call a sunset provision or a repealer, because it'd take a few years to see what impact it may have, but then also to stop it if needed. So hopefully some version of that would be in there if something passes. I'm going to explain what I refer to as the complexity and the moving parts. Just in general, the same concept applies to any of them. Is basically that anything that is done, and as a backdrop, remember this, as I recall, right now, approximately 25% of the PERS active membership are either eligible to retire or eligible within 5 years, from memory, but I think that's probably pretty close. And so that is a backdrop. If anything that is done that incentivizes an active member to retire earlier than they otherwise would have, adds that additional cost and liability to the system. On the other hand, if they're incentivizing retirees to come back and fill a vacant position or a vacant teacher position, if they come back and the contributions are paid on that, but they're not accruing additional liability, well, then that's the offset or the partial offset. So you've got the extra costs and liabilities on this side for anything that incentivizes them to leave earlier. And then you've got the positive contribution part on the other hand as it comes back in. But all this, of course, is based on assumptions and projections. None of us can predict the future. We don't truly know, especially on how many retirees may take advantage. But depending upon those different inputs and the timing of those inputs, then that could offset the cost partially or wholly or to be determined. Another point that you'll hear mentioned is on an individual basis, again, based on assumptions and projections, there could be a time to where after 15, 16, 18 years that the contributions on this side start to be positive and be positive to PERS and offset the cost. But again, it just comes back to the timing. But if the liability they would need to expect if something changes would be put on the front end, and then depending upon the timing, we'll just have to see if that's enough to offset it. like, as I mentioned, the break in service is something that we're especially mindful of. To remind you, the IRS requires a bona fide break in service. State law defines what that was. It used to be 45 years. It was moved to 90.
Days.
Sorry, days. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. That'd be a long time, wouldn't it? We were talking about 30 years
That's a
earlier.
big break.
See,
I think that's bona fide.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, it's probably baked in because I'm trying to make sure and help that break. I've got carried away there. But it used to be 45 days and now it's 90 days. And then some of these bills, again, some leave it at 90, some make it 45, some make it 30. And one of the, I guess I'll call it brainstorms that we've had internally, and I've shared with a few individuals in the context of this, is, and it would need further review, but, maybe if folks don't return to work, consider moving the break to 6 months or a year, but then no restrictions on the return to work. Change a few things, extend the break to 6 months or a year. Year certainly would be ideal, 6 months if couldn't do that, but then 100% with no restrictions coming back. And a few times that's come up, or I mentioned that, I would say it's probably got mixed results, so only time will tell. But with that, I'll start to close by saying another area we wanted to cover today is a few slides on the funding impact. You've seen some of that before. But we also had a board member request about, so we've got the baseline and we've Senate Bill 2004, the funding bill and the ADEC and so forth. We had a request to also show the phase-in of the ADEC. So Ed has got that prepared, and we can either pause now for questions on legislation, or we can go ahead and go to him, or however.
Let's stay on legislation first. It appears to me that in the return to work, especially on the teachers, that this bill incentivizes, because it changes for teachers that 50% pay, moves it to 65%. And it's not half a year, it's 65% for a whole year. Am I correct on that?
I think so. I certainly could see
Bill
that.
2003, yes, sir.
Yeah.
So that, to me, would incentivize some of those to go ahead and retire and get that additional money. Now, my question is, who pays for the insurance?
It depends on the bill. It wouldn't be PERS, but these bills, that's a great point. A lot of these bills have provisions to where the employer could pay for the insurance. Now,
Could or will?
I think they have the option. Most of them give them the
Could, it
option.
says
Could, yeah.
The Senate bill is 80%.
Yeah,
and
that's
they-
right.
For anybody, and they can pay the insurance. It
Mhm.
specifically says they can pay the insurance.
That's Senate Bill 2911.
2911 has an 80% provision for anybody that returns to work. And just as an example, in my office, I have 12 people. 4 of those would be crazy. It's a 30-day return to work, not to leave. Even bona fide and me not telling them they're gonna come back, they know I'm gonna hire them because they're 4 of my folks who have been with me for 36 years. But they would be, I would have 1/3 of mine eligible to, and that's, that's a small sample.
And that would incentivize Bill to retire.
But no, I'm gonna bring, I was definitely, but bringing them back, but, I guess the other issue is where it catches up is cash flow on the front side. Is the cash flow issue on the front side of that.
Sure, and I'd love for Ed to talk about this topic in general, and especially with their experience in other states, and go ahead.
Yeah, return to work bills are so prominent right now in I think all the states in the Southeast right now. We've done bills for the 3 that I work on here in the Southeast. So, and it's kind of what we spent the last month on. And these are the hardest bills to cost out because you're talking about folks making a choice in whether they're going to do this. And so it's hard because we're talking about assumptions. And so we're adjusting retirement assumptions to say how many people do we think will take advantage of it. This is an enticement to be able to retire, take a little bit of a break, whether how many days it is or what, and come back and be receiving your benefit, albeit maybe a little bit smaller of a benefit because you've left potentially earlier than you might have. But you start getting cost of living adjustments, and then you're on top of that receiving a salary of maybe up to 80% of what you previously received. So there is an enticement of many folks doing this. So we've adjusted our retirement assumptions pretty significantly to account for that. So what that does is it changes that projection of the benefit payment stream pretty significantly up front. I mean, we're talking one of the bills potentially, when it's for all members, that we could be paying an additional $120 million a year in benefit payments. Now, the other side of it is how many current retirees will come back to work. That's the key to whether this is a these are really costly bills, or these are, offset by those people coming back, because they're the savings. They're the additional contributions where they're already receiving their benefit. They're not coming back and accruing a new benefit. They're receiving their benefit, and we could get 28.9% of their pay into the PERS trust without giving them a benefit. So that has a significant cost. So it's a matter of the additional benefit payments up front, and then how much contributions will be coming in for these retirees.
Yeah, are you saying the teacher gets there 30 years in, retires for 30 days, come back and work in the same classroom at 80% of what they're initially made with benefits?
With health benefits, not with additional retirement benefit, but
And
with
they
health
won't
benefits.
They're receiving their
They won't
benefit.
be paying into the retirement system, but they'll be drawing money from it. That's got to cost us a bunch of money, even though I'm for that.
One thing,
They have changed it where now a retiree just pays the 19.9, or the employer just pays the 19.9. With this, they gotta pay them both. They've gotta pay the 9 and the 19.9. They have to pay 28.8.
So even under 80%, they're paying 89%.
Right.
They're paying another 9% than they would have paid for any other employee, because they're gonna cover that employee's portion too.
And if I'm not mistaken, the rate is on the full salary, it's not on the 80%.
Oh, that's
I believe
right.
so.
That is,
I think that's right. So if it's,
Yeah.
So it's more than
100,000, if you got $100,000 employee who's making 80, they're gonna pay them the 28.9 on 100,000 and not on the 80.
that's at least on the 80%.
On the 80% one, the others, I
about
don't
the others, but
know,
you're
but I
right.
don't remember on the other one, but
Yeah.
on that one, they're paying it on the full, so it's gonna cost the employer more money for that to happen, if you're paying that on the full amount, and then you're paying them 80% and giving them health insurance,
Yeah, maybe pretty close to what you pay for a 100% employee.
probably more.
Could be.
and one thing, just as background on the health insurance, and I'll look to Mason to make sure I say this correctly. As I understand it, you have the state and school employees' health insurance plan. And so it's exactly like it sounds, that the state and school employees, so retirees from the school system should be able to have health insurance already. Now, they have to pay for it and so forth, and your rates may change, but they have access to that. But that's not the case for the cities and counties and all that.
That's up to us.
That's right. Or at least we sponsor some things to help
We make
with
that
that.
call along with our carrier, whether we can, whether.
Oh, you're talking about as a county, are you?
As a county or
Yeah.
as a city, we'd make the call.
Let me ask the question about the break-in service, 90 days, 45, or 30. Is that an IRS standard or is that a state standard?
That's in state law. IRS requires the bona fide break-in service, but they don't define how long. The 90 days is in state statute, and it's state law. It's in our reg too, but it's in the statute.
I would not speak for active superintendents out there right now, but to get a teacher in the classroom on the first day, the change would need to be, because the way it's, as I understand it, and help me on this, Jay, it's not from the day you retire. In other words, if a teacher retires on June the 30th, the break does not begin until students arrive the next year. So that portion in order to get people to come back to work and help superintendents, it would be best if that 30 or 45 days is a calendar date and not the other. Would that not incentivize more people to return to work if they had that? I mean, I'm trying to look at it from both sides of trying what the return to work and what the legislators are trying to do, but it doesn't help if you don't have a certified teacher in there at the beginning of the year. So
Current break-in service begins at the school year.
That's right, yeah.
So obviously, even if it was a 30-day break-in service, that teacher could not start until September, and we need teachers August 1. So that teacher really would not be employable probably until the next school year.
That's right. By regulation, in the context of teachers, it starts after the school year. Now, I believe that part is just in regulation only.
That is, and Audra's on the line. We talked about this over and over. The issue is that summer, all teachers are off in summer.
Well,
So the break is until.
I would argue that the teachers are on contract during the summer because their contract, when I wrote contract, it was for 190 days spread over a 12-month period. And I chose when they work. I could choose for them to work in the summer. I could choose for them to work 180 consecutive days. I could do whatever I wanted to within that contractual time. And they get paid 12 months divided equally. So I would argue that the day they retire is, but that's just me. I have an issue with that by itself. But I want to go back to the real incentive now. The real incentive for a retiree is health insurance. I mean, I don't know how much health insurance costs today, but if you retire before age 65 and you're not on Medicare, that is a significant cost, and they will have to look at how much they're going to get, whether it's 60% or 80%, and if they're a tier 4 and they retire at 25 years, and then they got to subtract how much they're going to be making. You see what I'm saying? Health insurance is going to be a big driver for teachers on whether or not they're going to retire or not retire. So the health insurance thing is a critical thing. I think that the legislators, depending on what they're trying to do and how they're going about trying to do that, is a driver is that, and even if you're a teacher, you retire, yes, you have access to the insurance, but you're paying the full ride. You're not paying, you don't get state subsidized. Is that right still, Jay? Is there still a state, you don't get that state subsidy when you retire? You can buy it, but it's full price.
$600 around.
I think you're exactly right on the health insurance being a very important factor, and I think the legislature in the context of this is aware of that and trying to do it. So I think you're right. They're trying, that's part of the reason in there. On the separation period and break-in service, to add back to that, and maybe after this comment, if Audra and Rob would like to say anything, but it's important to keep in mind that even though the IRS doesn't define what the length is, it does say it has to be this true bona fide break-in service, which means this complete severance of employment, not an intention to come back, not an intention to take the summer off or any other period and come back. So you've got to have that true break-in service. But Audra, Rob, do you want to comment on this subject area any?
No, you're absolutely right, Ray. And really, the bona fide break-in service is intended to be a true break-in service. So we understand the incentives and the needs of the school for wanting to have somebody come back at the start of the school year, but that actually cuts against it under a facts and circumstances test, truly looking like a bona fide break-in service. So it's very common for teacher retirement systems, in particular, to state that the separation from service begins at the start of the school year. That is when the time will start ticking.
My comment on that is a person that would take advantage of this, it is clearly their intent to retire. So whatever the break of service is, they say, I intend to retire and do this. So that is, I think that's kind of a nebulous sort of thing, because they're gonna say, I'm retiring, and that's the reason I'm doing this and this. So the break of service could be 1 day or 10 days. I'm doing this to get the extra 80% plus the 60%, I mean, whatever it is. So I think that that's kind of a little bit sort of, to me, but that's not mine. That's the IRS has got to figure that out. So I think that the break that would be established in order to help employers, if that's what they're trying to do, the legislature needs to be looking at establishing in the law what a break is. Now, my real question is, and the other part about that is, when you do a return to work, I'm retiring, but I am coming back, and it is going to be in the same position. I mean, that's.
And that right there, I think, if I heard that right, is a violation of the IRS requirement.
I'm telling you, but that's what this law allows you to do.
And that's gonna become more of a staff issue, is how do you police that? Claims committee could become a lot more active, as a result, but again, you've got the same thing now, it's the same issue
Speaking
now.
for schools, if you got a math teacher shortage, and you got a math teacher retiring, and you can convince them to come back, I don't know how you don't violate that law.
Or with a regulation that says school year starts, your stay on the period the cooling off period of the bona fide break. Y'all are the only ones that actually got it figured out.
Well, speaking of some of those things, well, a couple things. One, at least some of the laws, and I think all of them, but I'm thinking of Senator Sparks' bill right now, I think. It says it has to be a bona fide break in service. So just FYI on that as additional background. More generally though, and before I say this, let me preface it by saying it's not my intention at all to be an alarmist right now. I'm just giving y'all information. I think return to work in some capacity could probably be worked out and administered, and if they consider the cost impact, all could probably work out in some way, and I've already shared some of that. With that said, though, and I specifically want to call in Audra and Rob if needed, but we have to remember part of the reason we do this, one of the main reasons on any of these things, is to maintain the qualified status of the trust. And two things really come to mind on that as it relates to this topic, is that allows member contributions to be pre-tax, and that's, of course, part of the reason why we don't pay taxes, and we don't want to do anything to violate that. So these things that we're talking about, that's one of the primary factors in considering the importance of making sure we monitor it and comply. And you've mentioned the enforcement part. As things are now, the member or retiree, member/retiree, they certainly bear a lot of the brunt of any type of violation, by like voiding their retirement or having to pay the retirement back to PERS, things like that. So just have to keep those things about. Again, not being an alarmist, but since we were talking around those topics, just sharing that. Audra, Rob, you want to comment on that some?
Sure, Ray. No, you're absolutely right about that. The other thing it does is it puts the system in the bad position of having to investigate whether or not there was a bona fide break or whether there was a prearranged agreement so that it can properly issue the 1099-R for the individual.
I have, as a superintendent, I have been in that place where coaches retired and they wanted to come back and coach, and I wrote a letter and said, you are hereby separated from service. You have no things, and your position will become vacant, and there will be interviews, et cetera, and you are not guaranteed any position. It'll be open, and I've covered all of that sort of thing, but here's my question: how many times can you retire, come back to active, retire, and come back to active?
Under current law, I don't think there are any limits. Yeah.
So I guess my question, if I retire and then the legislature gives teachers $4,000, they unretire, come back, they up their base, they work 4 more years, and they get the step increases, and then they retire again, and the next year the legislature gives another $4,000, say, whoops, I'm gonna retire again now. So, I mean, go back. I'm just concerned about the in and out of the system, so.
A great point, and actually going back to the brainstorm I mentioned earlier, I didn't expand on this part, but in that same thought, you know, maybe just as an idea, and this would need to be carefully considered, but maybe it's changed where when you retire from PERS, you're retired. That's it. There's no more retirement.
It's one of the irrevocable choices that you make. That would be my thought, but.
And from what I understand, I know several states, maybe even many, do that. But yeah, once you retire from PERS, there's no more returning to active service. You're retired. And then perhaps extend the break, like I mentioned, and then maybe no restrictions after a 6 month or an annual break. Because to me, even though I'll let Ed speak to this, but I still want to be a little bit cautious. But it seems to me that if you extend the break, maintain or extend the break, if you extend it, it's probably less of an incentive to retire early because you have to wait longer.
Now,
And then you have the no limits coming back.
Were there some restrictions on who could actually return to work in there, in that bill? If I recall, there were 3 or 4 restrictions.
You're right, but there's one bill that is for everybody, I think, with the note. Some of them are teachers, some of them are any
Well,
retirees who teach.
I think it particularly talked about Jay. Said he couldn't retire and come back to work. A superintendent, I said, superintendent.
Oh, well, that's right. There is one where he cannot.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, no
Yeah, Senate Bill
elected
2911
officials,
excluded
yeah,
elected
elected officials,
Yeah.
K-12
superintendents.
Superintendents and
Yeah.
administrators for colleges and universities.
Yeah.
I think they may have reached out and touched some UMC, individuals. You know, some executives in the, at the
Universities.
medical center. So my real question is, does it have any impact on the legislator? Does it restrict them from retiring and coming back to work?
First of all, thanks for mentioning the exemptions in one of those bills. The one that we refer to as everybody does have those few exemptions. But I should have mentioned that earlier. I don't think so on the legislators. I don't think it does anything to affect them or change them or none of that.
Or any elected official. It
Yeah.
doesn't change it doesn't change the path of any local elected officials under the 25% rule or the other.
So does that eliminate the 25% rule for
No.
those that are
No.
already retired and elected?
No.
It does not eliminate it, but it doesn't let you get to the 80%. It wouldn't let you take advantage of the 80% rule. It just left you where you were and didn't do anything on the legislative front.
I'm tired of the legislative discussion. Can we go on to something else now?
Well,
And who knows what it'll look like, who knows what or if it will look like in another 2 weeks.
Well, I can understand that sentiment. And if agreeable, we could go to some of the slides that were requested and then continue the discussion. I may come back to one legislative item, but I definitely won't now, given that.
Well, go ahead and cover it now.
Well, I was just gonna say at some point, one of the things that you probably will hear from me next year as a recommendation legislatively, and it may even be the only one, we'll have to wait and see it in the fall, but it is something to the effect of considering legislation to require 2 years to pass a PERS-related bill. And not all PERS bills, I'm not talking about funding bills or anything like that, but anything that would be changing the plan design or having a material impact on the liabilities or things like that. Introduce it 1 year, study it, pass it the next year, especially with 4-year terms in the legislature. And of course, the details would have to be worked out, but I know some of the states do that. I know of at least one, and that seems like that might be a prudent measure for us to consider. So that's something that you may hear from me in the fall. But that's all I was talking about.
I don't remember if we actually proposed it. There was a discussion several years ago about that. I don't remember if that was an actual proposal, but I know we had discussion of that.
Yeah.
Several years ago.
And that reminds me of one other thing, has nothing to do with the legislation other than new employees start in a few days. How are we on the computerization, the implementation, and the employers being able to satisfy? Where do we stand and where are the hiccups that you anticipate that's going to arise in that implementation that starts in just a few days?
Well, I think, moving full speed ahead toward implementation, I think we're poised for implementation and go live. As you mentioned, I think there will be, some hiccups. There's certainly the possibility of that for any kind of major implementation and certainly in relatively short time frame. So I think we're in good shape and moving along and, poised for implementation, but I'm sure there'll be some challenges and adversity and some hiccups. I think area, with likelihood of the hiccups are the employers, as you mentioned. Now, one thing to keep in mind about that is the actual reporting. Even though March 1st is just around the corner, the reporting won't happen until the first few days of April, and that's the typical standard type process. But we certainly, I think the staff and team have done a nice job, and I really appreciate their work and effort, and plan to speak on that more probably in the April meeting or after things. And so I really want to thank them. We have communicated with employers, we've trained employers, we have trained them in, or offered training in multiple ways, whether they be virtual, in person, or recorded, and had other open time frames for questions and so forth. We also did a survey that had about a 10% response rate, so I'd say that's probably a fair sample size, not by anybody, but I think from memory, at last viewing of that, most employers felt they were ready or somewhat ready. At the same time, some expressed, said maybe they anticipated some concerns would go live. So we're still monitoring that, working on that, following up on that, but are poised for go live here. And be happy to talk about that further or at a later time, but I'm sure there'll be some hiccups. And I would say that one of the possibilities on that is in the employer area, because area, because we have over 800 employers of different types, and we rely currently and historically so much on how the employers report, and so that'll probably carry forward with this. We also have received some positive feedback. There are a few board members, of course, that represent employers, and we appreciate their help and feedback. And so that's a long way of saying, moving full speed ahead and should be on track for go live, but I'm sure there'll be some hiccups and we'll be prepared and work through those as well.
I would just request that as those hiccups occur, that you inform the board so that we can respond to employers that we interact with and that sort of thing.
Certainly, be happy to, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, could I request a 5-minute break before we start? Mr. Chairman, before we continue with the slides. Mr.
That's
Chairman.
a nice way of saying we're over.
Thank you.
All right, maybe make sure and pause or cut everything off or something.
But
The max I could put in at age 32, and I'm 68.
That's good.
And I put that in July. But I'm trying to figure out how not to, and there's just not, I can't find one. So I'm legal.
Everything's on, FYI. Everything's on. Is it working? Hey, Chad, everything's on. All right, sorry about that, but we appreciate your indulgence there as we work through those technical difficulties. As I understand, everything is back up and live and on, and the mics and so forth right now. I know we haven't officially reconvened, but just want to make you aware. Is that right, Mike? Everything's working? All right, sorry about that. If Chairman agrees, we can
You'll
continue.
continue with,
Should
the
I,
presentation.
do I start over?
No.
Don't start over.
Yeah, okay.
And the materials, so.
All right, so on this slide, again, we talked about the PERS baseline line, but again, this is what we presented. This is what I presented back in December, and when we get out to that 30th year, you see it's right around 77%. Just trust me, that's the number. They're just below 80%. With the additional funding, the $500 million, you can see a little bit in 2026 that the orange line is a little bit above all of the other lines. It does come in and help right away. But then it kind of gets hidden behind some of the other lines. But eventually you can see that the additional funding that comes in does get the projected funded ratio in a slightly better position than what we were showing back in December, and we get to about 84% on that line there. So a little bit better, but not to where kind of what the funding policy's goal is to get to 100% by 2047. The gray line there, the third line is if the PERS ADEC was contributed. So this is if 25.98% of payroll was contributed in the 27 fiscal year, a 27-28 fiscal year, and then so on and so forth, whatever we calculate the ADEC to be, and it kind of hovers, and you'll see a graph like that, but it kind of hovers around the 26% mark for pretty much the next 22 years. But we get to 100% funded in that 2047, by that 2047 date. And then we kind of turn off the second piece of the ADEC, and we're just contributing the normal cost contribution. And when we get out to Tier 5, when it's mostly just Tier 5, which it would be in 2050, 2055, the normal cost is around 1.25% that the employers would be paying. So the contribution would drop from 26% down to about 1.25% or so percent of payroll. So it'd be a significant drop in what would be required by the employer at that time. Again, and then the black line is just if it's a little bit lower and it extends it out one extra year to get to 100% funded, but it would be if we phased in to the 25.98 or the 26, if you will. It would actually be a little bit higher that would be needed because we're phasing into that. So we'd be like 22%, 21, 22, 23, 24, over the next 5 years. So it does take a little bit of longer time. But again, it gets you to that 100% mark within the time period that we're looking at. If we flip it and just look at what the unfunded actual accrued liability would be on each of these four scenarios, you can see for the current PERS baseline, when we're out 30 years from now, the unfunded does come down from where it currently is, but we're anticipating that it actually will grow over time.
Ed?
Yes.
It looks like we got a delay in the slides. Maybe go back and, because you had the unfunded slide up. There it is. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you. So in this slide, again, the PERS baseline, the unfunded, which is around 26 billion now, would potentially maybe grow to close to $30 billion, but it would come down again as more and more of the contributions due to Tier 5 coming in helps to pay down that unfunded in those later years. So we're left with about 15 to 16 billion dollars with that point. If with the additional funding, it would bring that down in the 30th year down to about $10 billion dollars. So again, it's the inverse of the funded ratio, but just to give you the dollar amounts of what the UAO would be. And then under the PERS ADEC method, you can see that we do go to zero in 2047 or 2048 if it's phased in. But you can see it's a pretty significant drop over the next 22 years in that unfunded. It's not a straight line. It's like paying your mortgage. It's, you know, you pay some principal, you pay some interest up front, so it's not a straight line accounting thing. It's you know, paying the interest off of the unfunded. But you do get to that point eventually by paying the ADEC. And then the last slide is just kind of a comparison of what the ADEC would be under all four of these scenarios. So obviously, under the last two scenarios, that would be what we'd be contributing. And you can see again on the gray line there, it kind of hovers. And that's what level percentage of payroll amortization method is supposed to do. If it's a deterministic projection and all of our assumptions are met as we assume, then the ADEC would be pretty consistent over these basically 22 to 23 years. And then you can see the significant drop that I was talking about, where the ADEC actually goes down to about 1.25 or 1.5% in that year. So that's what would all be required to be paid. Again, similar thing for the phase-in. But under the PERS baseline and PERS SB 2004 legislation, the ADEC is still is anticipated to grow because, you know, we're not making those contributions. We're making the statutory contribution rates and just not paying that off in the closed period that is on the board's funding policy basis. So the ADEC would grow to near 40%. It would come down as that first initial piece would be paid off in 2018, but we'd have a lot of losses over all of these years that we weren't paying the ADEC potentially. So while the ADEC would come down to about the 20%, 15 to 20% level, we would still potentially have some contributions left over at that point. So again, just kind of, these are similar slides that you guys see every valuation cycle, but just kind of wanted to give it to some perspective on this additional funding. So that's all I had on that. We could certainly talk about these or go back into some more discussion on other legislation, but I'll leave it up to y'all.
And I don't really have anything further. You know, I spoke a little bit earlier this morning, as I'd mentioned this, some of this for this time was a board member request. We wanted Ed to go forward, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any question of the board?
I want to know if you've done anything with this, with a negative return. We were talking yesterday with our consultant, and I had asked the question of them about how many years apart are our zero or negative returns. And the answer was approximately 2 per 10 years is what he shared with us. So with that, and one of my concerns is the $500 million is greatly appreciated. The $50 million is greatly appreciated. However, when we go from 500 million to 50 million, then we're still, for lack of a better term for me, underfunded about $400 million from our ADEC. So the concern that I have, if the influx or infusion stream is only $50 million a year, that in a negative or a risk return, the current legislature at that time, because it will drop below 50% fairly significantly, if we don't have mitigating monies in there some way, then the current legislature, not current now, but current in the negative year, might consider a knee-jerk reaction that would impact active employees and retirees and their benefits. I'm not talking about the people now, but we've heard what they've said and what they have want to do, but I'm concerned about the future now when all of us may not be here. So that's a concern that I have. And if $400 million a year is not a doable thing, and the legislature chooses not to do that, what is a doable number in my mind that's greater than 50 million a year? So one of our board members has suggested $200 million a year. But, you know, I'm wondering what that is. And do we as a board need to meet with the legislative leadership to talk, if any of the other board members have this sort of concern that I have, that this board needs to meet with the leadership of the legislature and say, this is a concern. How do we build in that a knee-jerk reaction does not occur? Because historically, over time, if you just leave it alone, the stock market tends to rebound and you end up getting that money back. So how do we build that protection for retirees and active members? You know, and that goes away when the 2055 gets there, or whatever year that Tier 5 is, and there's no more Tier 4s out there. So now that's a concern that I have right now, and I am deeply appreciative of what is going on in the legislature right now. But now I'm looking even farther down the road. So, is there any work that you've done on that? Now I know that back in December, I guess, you may have shown us some negative returns, how that would impact, but I don't know at that time that any of the bills had been introduced that would show numbers, you know, like the 500 million and the 50.
Yeah, at the valuation cycle, we always run our, risk measures with different one-year return negatives or off of the 7% return. I think we do every 2% up to 6% higher and 6% lower. And then we even throw in, well, what if we did have like a negative 5% or something like that? So that's all in the context of the valuation in the back of the report there. We could certainly run these at those similar scenarios as well. It's always good to look at the risk. We can take a deterministic projection like this is and run it stochastically, where we're looking at, what is the probability of where this line goes to, where is the thing. The problem with that is it kind of gets, the bands get really wide 30 years from now. And so it's like, well, there's a probability of being 0% funded, and then there's a probability of being 200% funded. So sometimes those stochastic models get kind of skewed the further you look out, maybe just you over the next 10 years and see where you're at for sure. But yeah, we can certainly run all of that, all of any kind of risk scenarios around these numbers.
You know, looking at your funded ratio chart there, the funded ratio with the 500 million, I'm assuming that in the 50 million, it's about 69%. Is that what the funded ratio is on your chart there? approximately.
In 2047?
In 2047.
I think so, yeah. It was about,
It's close to that.
yeah, it was in the
Okay.
letter, yeah, that we sent out.
Between now and 2047, if we have, and I calculated we're in about 6 years after, I think 2020, no, 4 years. 2022 was our last down year.
Yeah.
So if you start right there, we've only got a few more years to another expected downturn if historically it stays like that.
Yeah.
And that will have a negative impact on the funded ratio if we do that. And that's where I'm concerned about a.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just one other thing, I forgot to point this out, and this is a big deal, because, you know, $1 billion into the trust fund, like you said, is great. We're very happy to get that. But look at the difference between, on this graph out in 2055, between the top two lines. That's $1 billion put in over the next 10 or 11 years saves that unfunded over $6 billion. The time value of money is really powerful for this $1 billion. It saves $6 billion of unfunded over a 30-year period by getting investment return on these additional contributions. So getting one or more of these kind of infusions like this over time really would help the funding as well.
In my discussion with Charles the other day, he and I talked about that very thing, that with this $500 million infusion, if we have 2 more good years like right now, all of a sudden we've got returns coming in off of that infusion that has a great and a positive effect. So the earlier we get those infusions, the better off we will be, and then that helps mitigate the concern that I have about legislative knee-jerk sort of reaction. So.
The conversation's moved on a little bit now, but just quickly back to one of your original questions about a negative scenario.
Yeah.
It's not in this slide deck, but he did do essentially the same, many of the same scenarios with a negative 8% return earlier, which we can resend you, or he may be able to pull up. Remember that?
Well,
Yeah, I can't pull that up now.
it's in the December deck. I've looked at that, so.
Well, this is actually, I think, something maybe since session, but nonetheless.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's similar to this.
Did
just a
they see
different-
that?
They did. I sent
They
it to
did
them,
see
yeah.
that? Okay.
Yeah, somewhere along the line. There's been a lot this year.
Let me put my legislator hat on, if I've had one. And probably the treasurer could speak to this a lot more than I do. But these large sums of money that we're talking about, and our friends over there, we don't know what the hospital situation is going to cost, and all these other entities. How much money is out there for us to have? We're interested in this, but they are interested in all these other things.
Oh, dude, okay.
Where's all that gonna come from?
Well, I can try to answer you. The specific source of the 500 million will be out of the CapEx fund, which is excess over the last few years. The budget last year, we anticipated about 7.4 in revenue, and we budgeted about 7.1 in change in expenses. So we had between $200 and $300 million that we expected to have in revenue over expenses in this current fiscal year. We're currently, is it 160 some odd million over expectations?
Maybe 185.
185.
Yeah.
So there is a very good likelihood if we finish this year just in line, we will have approximately 500 million more in revenue this year than expenses. So that's a good thing. But where the money's coming from for the 500 million is out of current CapEx dollars, which is excess over the past few years. Medicaid is going to ask for 300 million or so next year. The teacher pay raises that are proposed, the one out of the House is about $280 million. The one out of the Senate, I think, is about 160, which also covers community college and IHL and teacher assistants. So your point is well taken that our spread is 200 to 300 million based on anticipated revenues and appropriated expenses. Medicaid itself could wipe every bit of that out as far as excess goes. So that's why it's a concern of mine to get a lump sum on the front end. Even though actuarially, I think they would really love it broken up a little bit for fear of a large dump in 1 year, and then you have the 8% loss. But I also can only control what I can control, and right now, being in the legislature, having 1.5 million in a fund and having probably 500 million in excess coming this year seems to be the most opportune time ever to put a $500 million infusion into PERS. In addition, the dip that we're going to see next year is because our 32% return is going to roll off our 5-year smoothing, but our 8% loss will still be on there. So we will see a reduction in the funded percentage or an increase in the liability that will go away 1 year later. If we assume even just 7%, because of the 5-year smoothing, we will lose that 8% loss. So sometimes when we see these charts and graphs moving, it's not based on funding. It's not based on anything other than prior investment experience. So my hope, and one of the more encouraging pieces of the graph, is with the 1 billion factored in, it appears we hit 60% within maybe 2 to 3 years, and then we exceed the 60%. 60%'s in the yellow. It's not in the green, but it's also not in the red. So that's good. But all of the bills, particularly, and I'm glad, and I came over, y'all were a little ahead of schedule today. I'm sorry I didn't get here faster. But all of the bills that I have had a hand in, I'm not going to speak a lot about other people's bills, because one of the worst things you can do in PERS is throw one little piece at the dartboard that sounds good and not think about what it does to the entire system. Everything we have done has been intentional, comprehensive, and considering what we did last year with the Tier 5 recommendation that came from this board. We did insert a 35-year unreduced retirement. That didn't come over in the recommendation. And that has honestly become the biggest lightning rod point of contention. But that was actually an employee-friendly amendment that was made to the PERS recommended Tier 5. And in addition to that, we put in the 4 years of military service credit. This year, after conversations with actuaries, and they have been very gracious and they've been very busy this year, because it seems like everybody wants to drop a PERS bill now after 20 years of not wanting to touch it. But the actions based on the information we got from the actuaries appeared that we could go to 30 years for everybody and we could stand it. Partly because we basically paid for it with the ORP reform from last year. Those numbers kind of track one another. So everything has been very intentional. I have met with my colleagues on the House side. I recognize it takes 2 chambers to pass any legislation, but with our 2 PERS recommended bills, the MPL and the Roth catch-up, I hope those bills pass. I would assume, and I'm not asking the board per se for a recommendation or an endorsement, but I assume any funding is appreciated by this board. And so we've got 2 funding bills. One is the $1 billion, and the other is putting $50 million into a COLA for Tier 5 to help assure that that COLA exists for our Tier 5 recipients. And then the 35 years to 30 would be the only one that I would say on the front end has a cost. And then return to work is very complex, and it has assumption changes, but ultimately I do believe it cash flows positive to the system. But one thing I think, based on Dr. McCoy's question, something the board to consider is that 2017 is the last time you did an experience study. If our bills pass this year that are before us, funding, Tier 5, all of the different things, years of service, since 2017, this board has lowered the assumed rate of return from 7.75 to 7, which caused a $6 billion increase in liabilities. There's been a $110 million infusion, and then hopefully a $1 billion infusion. If mobile sports betting passes and they dedicate that stream of revenue, whatever it may be, that may be an infusion. I think the board maybe should consider, should there be a new experience study with a completely new tier, additional funding you've never received before, and the issues that we are 10 years into that experience study, and the legislature up until 2024 did nothing. So Dr. McCoy's $453 million underfunding is based on the closing window of receiving 100% paid off PERS by 2047. So I would encourage you just to consider looking at an experience study since these major changes have occurred to PERS.
Just a quick clarification, he's saying experience study, but I believe he's referring to the funding policy.
Oh, excuse me. What was done in 2017 that was adopted that has led us to the ADEC, that led us to a 2047 100% fully paid off PERS. And to go back to somebody's comment earlier, I was trying to listen to what I missed. I'm certainly not wanting to do what they did in 99. So those points are well taken, that these bills that have been passed or proposed by other people that go retroactive, if they've talked with the actuaries and they've had these conversations, we want to work with our colleagues, but we do not want to make those mistakes again.
Going back to the numbers that we have and the negative 8%, what you did for us maybe a month ago now.
Thereabouts, yeah.
It would, with a negative 8% return in fiscal year 2027, I think this is including the $500 million and the $50 million per year. In 2045, I think the projected funded ratio would drop to approximately 42%, thereabouts. So that's the significant drop that a negative 8% would do, and that's what I'm talking about is let's say 2040. Y'all will still be under y'all's term, correct, at that time?
I got one more year. It's all I'm promised if the good Lord allows me to live. So,
is that about right, Ed?
Yeah, I'm bringing it. I'm trying to bring it up.
Okay.
It's not letting me, but got lost. Oh, there it is. Yeah, this is those same four graphs with the negative 8% return in fiscal year 2027.
So just know where I'm coming from at this point, even with that. And, you know, my colleague, Mr. Breland, every time we heard this and we were having good stuff, and he would say, but 1 year or 2 years would be hugely bad. And we have experienced 2 years consecutive down. So over the years, I have heard him, and I am beginning to lean more toward Mr. Breland and his concern about the impact of the negative years that we know are coming, just don't know when. And I'm also beginning to lean more and more toward our treasurer and his suggestion of how much funding that we need. Legislature cannot do the 400 million, but 200 million a year, that all of a sudden increases it to $1 billion in 5 years. And in 25 years, that's $5 billion. And then if the board chooses to look at the funding policy and do initial with a stroke of the pen, we've changed it another $5 billion. I mean, just there's things that can be done, but I'm trying to make us all aware of what can happen that we don't have any control over, which is the stock market and the tariff situation and all of that. So just wanted to share that with you.
You're right. I mean, to me, I've always been an advocate of the 200 million. I think it's far more affordable than the 500 million, even though the 500 million is coming out of the CapEx fund. The 200 million actually gets you to where you want to go, where we want to go a lot faster. I mean, by year 4, we have 800 million under the 200 million. That would alleviate the problem that you're talking about on a shortfall. It's not a matter of if the market goes down, it's a matter of when the market goes down, and likely is sooner rather than later. And we are, I mean, you said 2 cycles maybe of bad investments. I've always been under the impression it's 1 cycle of a bad investment. It depends on how bad it is.
Well, we're talking about one cycle, but there's two per 10 years that
Right,
occurs.
right,
Two-
yeah,
yeah.
10-year plan, like a
Yeah.
100-year flood. Anyway, I mean, you know, we have the money to do 200 million over 10 years. I mean, and it gets you with compounded interest, with everything else invested correctly, done correctly. I believe we have said it gets you to almost 90% within 10 years, if I remember the numbers correctly. I thought that's where we want to go. I mean, the other one, it's great. I appreciate the legislature wanting to do this. It's been a long time coming, but it gets you up, but the 200 million just is a much better solution. Again, we have the money right now to do it. We have cash to do it. And I just have always been an advocate of it.
I hate that you were not here earlier to hear our discussion. I'm leaving this now. We were discussing legislation about return to work and some of the issues that the director had shared with us and the complicated and the moving parts, and then some of my experiences in the education side and employees and all of that sort of thing. And we even mentioned that years ago we had discussions on the board that any sort of thing of this magnitude, even with a tier 5, we had to extend that time because of complications of computerization and getting that sort of thing. That it may be that as you finish up the legislative work, the return to work and some of the unintended consequences and some of the issues that I know that it's been brought up to you, it may be that it enacted, but not be July 1, but be out in the future. And I don't know any of your, whatever's going on there. This is just Randy McCoy speaking. I'm certainly not speaking for the board. It's just a lot of complicated issues that I see those there. So I appreciate you just listening to me and bearing with me on that part there.
Well, and I appreciate what you do and who you represent on the board. As it relates to the return to work, you're correct. It's very complex. Everything that you guys do in this board is very complex, and it's why sometimes the piecemeal approach is not good. It needs to be comprehensive. On the return to work, I'll go ahead and tell you, not only have we run the numbers, and I look at worst case scenario, just like you're talking about with losses, that I get to use actuarial assumptions. That's how this board functions. So the actuarial assumptions, which are determined by the actuaries and adopted by the board, are the numbers that we've tried to use. And in the hypothetical, yes, we are going to have a year that there's a loss. I think everybody would agree with that. But the actuarial assumption is 7%. And if we exceed that again this year, that's a positive. And whatever year it comes that we don't exceed it, it is certainly a negative. But on the return to work, as I understand it, based on the actuarial expectation, the lifetime of a retiree to the date of death, this cash flows. And then anyone who's already made their decision, so we're not affecting their retirement decision, they're already retired. There's 100,000 of them out there. Potentially come back. And I will go ahead and tell you another piece that I'm looking at for this board as consideration, and I think from things I've heard from y'all, is we have a pretty serious problem with contract work that's circumventing PERS. If we offer return to work, a lot of these people that are on contract are former state employees. So if we offer a return to work program where DOR, the Treasurer's Office, the Auditor's Office, MDEQ, the Attorney General's Office, all these people that have retired at 25 years or 27 years, and they return in a capacity to where PERS is capturing both sides, employer and employee, from the employer, we're better off. And I think it gives this board a greater chance to rein in contract employment that would be a benefit to the system. So I look forward to continuing to work with you, but everything that we're trying to do is very intentional. It's in trying to utilize the numbers that are accepted from the actuaries, and knowing that guesses are hard the more complex it is. And that's ultimately what we're doing. We're making a bit of a guess in the effect it'll have.
Mr.
Ed,
Chairman?
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure I commended the treasurer on doing what I did half the time, which was 12 years, and that's getting through to Dr. McCoy with one thing.
Well, it only took me 6.
Your skills of telepathy are much better than mine.
It's been a work in progress.
And I think I've asked this question before, and you don't have to bring the chart back up, but is that part of what you do with, similar to sensitivity testing, whenever you say, okay, we're gonna have a bad year, and then you jump back to the 7% for the remainder of the time?
Yeah, it was just a 1 year.
You don't assume then that we're gonna meet our assumptions, which is over time, basically 7%? Okay. And so it does end up being a little lower than our assumptions. So that's kind of not necessarily a worst case scenario, but a bad case scenario when you're looking at it from that perspective.
It's a deterministic, that's how we do it, and deterministic with a 1 year. If you did stochastic, you could, if you got a negative year, if you're assuming 7% you're gonna get on average, obviously the other 29 years would be something above 7.
When I hate to rehash what we already discussed, but Dr. McCoy moved on a little quicker than I could get my question out, so I did want to make sure that was that same
just 1 year.
analysis, okay.
Yeah.
Are there others, are y'all?
No, sir, I don't think I have anything else. And as from our standpoint, I think we've covered what we needed to. I think,
Do any of the board have any matters dealing with legislation that needs to be discussed at this time? We're backing up close to the 12 o'clock hour. I'll just say it sure is nice to be with a group of folks that's so smart, it makes me look smarter than what I really am. So thank y'all for your input. Is there anything else? The legislative committee is now adjourned.
thank you.